In my 5th chapter, I present my final conclusions and place the cultural process in what seems to be its proper relation to the biological and universal processes. Our forefathers did not always preserve a clear distinction between these three processes, and I have tried to introduce some order into the chaos produced in their minds by the controversies that accompanied the submission of the Darwinian hypotheses. Here, again, I have not begun the chapter by stating my final conclusion. I have led up to that conclusion gradually, and only reached the last stage of my argument in the last 2 paragraphs. The treatise, then, is nothing more than it pretends to be. It simply contains the results of an inquiry, and an interpretation of the facts that the inquiry revealed. I have made no attempt to erect a grand theoretical edifice. I have merely dug the foundations on which an edifice may later be erected. The temperaments of some thinkers will incline them to accept the conclusions I have drawn. These will not care a jot for my laborious proofs, and may even claim that I can tell them nothing that they did not know before. They are entitled to their opinions. The temperaments of others will be strongly opposed to my conclusions. These will wish to examine the proofs very closely, and it is for them that I have written. For their sake, too, I have preserved a rigorous distinction between the facts and my interpretation of the facts. Those who have lent a ready ear to the more exaggerated claims that have been based on the uncertainty principle in physics may shy at my unrepentant determinism. But at present, I do not propose to add to what I have said in paragraph 175 and note 646. There are signs that in regard to the alleged spontaneity of the electron calmer views are beginning to prevail than was the case 2 years ago. So it may be that no serious dispute will arise, but it is always well to be forearmed. Let me say, then, that I acknowledge and even emphasize the free will of individual human beings. I am prepared to accept, if I must, the spontaneity of the individual electron. These things do not affect the doctrine of determinism as I understand and define it, and I shall not contemplate the making of any further defense, unless, in the opinion of competent thinkers, the position I have taken up seems likely to be rendered untenable by further researches into electronic behavior. To a mind that is unaccustomed to the methods of scientific research, the facts as presented may appear oversimplified. The reason is that I have refused to publish them until I felt that I understood them. If anyone should hesitate to accept the character of evidence, the chart of evidence, Appendix 1, because its contents are too satisfactory, my reply is that truth is usually a simple thing. If an alleged truth appears complicated, the probability is that we understand it imperfectly. And I believe that much of the hazy, apparently abstruse science that is current today only appears to contradict this view of truth because some research students, eager to produce results, make a premature disclosure of their data. The association of prenuptial chastity and what I have called the deistic cultural condition has been known to me since 1929, and I will confess to having written a short paper on the subject, but I recalled the manuscript before it was published. By the spring of 1930, I had tumbled to the existence of a compulsory, irregular, or occasional prenuptial continence, and after a few more months had completed the chart of evidence, as it now appears. Then I toyed again with the idea of publication, but eventually decided to withhold the chart from the public eye until I felt I really understood its meaning. I know that it is usual to present the results of a long research in a series of short papers, and that it is dangerous to break a convention, but I cannot be persuaded that the chart would have been welcomed or even considered unless at the same time an interpretation had been placed on the evidence it contains. To assist a readier understanding than would be gained by reading the book from the beginning to the end, I have not hesitated to summarize and even to repeat the argument in what I consider to be the appropriate place. My suggestion is that after reading the first chapter and so much of the second and third chapters as may be necessary to understand the technique of the inquiry, the reader will find it easier to study paragraph 152 and then to proceed straight to the end, returning afterwards to study the details of the evidence. Paragraph 158 also is a useful summary for those who wish to take a still shorter cut. But one point must be emphasized in considering the contents of the last chapter. It is vital to distinguish between what I have called the first and second primary laws, paragraphs 160, 174. They are both distinct and dissimilar. If they are discussed at the same time, endless confusion will result. Briefly stated, my final conclusion is that the cultural behavior, as defined, of any human society depends first on the inherent nature of the human organism, and secondly on the state of energy into which, as a result of its sexual regulations, the society has arrived. According to the amount of continence they compelled, the sexual regulations adopted by human societies in the past divide themselves into 6 classes. These have produced 6 distinct states of energy, 3 lesser, 3 greater. All the uncivilized societies were in one or the other of the 3 states of lesser energy. Civilized societies have always been in one or other of the 3 states of greater energy. Each of the 3 states of lesser energy produces a definite cultural condition. I call these cultural conditions zoistic, monistic, deistic. Only one of the 3 states of greater energy produces a definite cultural condition, rationalistic. The other states of greater energy are those of expansive and productive energy. A deistic society can display expansive energy, but not productive energy, unless it first becomes rationalistic. If a rationalistic cultural stratum retains its energy for about 1 generation, the records do not justify a more definite statement. Its cultural tradition seems to be augmented by an element I have called human entropy. Just as the second law of thermodynamics, or the law of entropy, appears to reveal the direction of the universal process, so this new element appears to reveal the direction of the cultural process, hence its name. And so long as its stratum continues to display great energy, its cultural behavior changes in the direction of the cultural process. If, however, its energy decreases, its behavior changes away from the direction. So far as my knowledge goes, no stratum can be shown to have moved in the direction for more than 1/2 of a generation after the appearance of human entropy. The possibility of its doing so must appeal to the imagination of any speculative philosopher. In connection with the inherent nature of the human organism, my use of the word conception should be explained. I do not use it as a psychologist, but as a social scientist. I note the invariable reaction of men to the unusual, but make no attempt to explain or analyze it. When I say that human culture, as defined, appears to be founded on the conception of the strange quality or power that is manifest in anything unusual or beyond comprehension, I merely mean that this seems to be the least common denominator of the 4 cultural conditions. I am far from suggesting that in the minds of all men there is, or was, a clearly formulated idea of that quality or power. Yet my use of the word conception may imply that in my opinion this is and was so. I have been unable, however, to think of any other simple manner of expressing myself, so I hope that the word, although unsatisfactory, will be allowed to pass as a useful method of describing a state of mind that plainly exists and existed. No one but myself is responsible for the methods I have adopted or for the conclusions I have drawn, but I am indebted to many scholars for help and encouragement. I could have included either the Amazulu or the Basuto within my survey, if Mr. J. Y. Gibson of Pietermaritzburg and Mr. F. H. Dutton of Maseru had not been so kind as to supply me with some unpublished information on certain points. I thanked them for their great trouble, and I should have been unable to take advantage of their expert knowledge if Mr. R. U. Sayce, lecturer in material culture in the University of Cambridge, had not written to them on my behalf. My warm thanks are also given to the Reverend Dr. D.S. Euler, who sent me a valuable manuscript containing some important information on the Shilluk. My difficulties in regard to the ideas and behavior of some other uncivilized societies have been reduced by Professor T.C. Hodson, the Reverend E.W. Smith, Dr. J.H. Hutton, and Dr. L.S.B. Leakey. Each of these gentlemen was kind enough to answer a number of questions that I put to them. I have learned much, too, from my conversations with Mr. J. H. Dryberg. Mr. B. L. Hallward, Fellow of Peterhouse, Cambridge, has assisted me in many ways, and I value greatly the sympathy and advice I received from Dr. A. C. Haddon, late reader in ethnology, from Dr. S. A. Cook, Regius Professor of Hebrew, and from Dr. A. B. Cook, Professor of Classical Archaeology, all in the University of Cambridge. When I was studying Sumerian and Babylonian law and history, Dr. R. Campbell Thompson, Fellow of Merton College, Oxford, was always ready to place his knowledge at my disposal and to advise me in my reading. My thanks are also due to Mrs. Doris Dingwall, who pointed out at an informal meeting held in University College, London, in May 1932, a deficiency in my definition of the word temple. As a result of her valuable criticism, I was able to increase the precision of my language by making a slight amendment. During my residence in Cambridge, I was fortunate enough to enjoy the privilege of a fellow commoner of Peterhouse. It is a pleasure to record my appreciation of the kindnesses extended to me by the Master and Fellows. In 1931, I presented to the Board of Research Studies in the University of Cambridge a dissertation on the subject of this book. Dr. R. Marrett, Reader in Social Anthropology in the University of Oxford, and Mr. F. C. Bartlett, Professor of Experimental Psychology in the University of Cambridge, acted as referees. I learned much from their criticism, and I am grateful to them for their subsequent encouragement. The manuscript was revised January-March 1933. The final paragraph was expanded and a few notes added in March 1934. JDU, London, 26 May, 1934.